It's 9:30, Sunday, August 29, 2022. We're still in Mackeral Cove. As you can see, it's probably not going to be the most boisterous sail back, since there is just the slightest hint of wind, certainly much less than 1 knot. And I'm just now getting ready to raise anchor, which is pretty easy since I have an electric windlass. So what I'll be doing is getting the anchor snubber off, which is this line that's on the cleat, goes down to a chain hook. We'll get that off and then raise anchor. So I'm going to undo that now. I can't really hold the camera and do that at the same time. All right, anchor snubber's off. I've got the engine running, so raising the anchor is pretty straightforward. Just step on the up button. The white marks on the chain are 100 feet. Right now we've got 16 feet of water, and I'm just going to let the weight of the anchor chain pull the boat toward where the anchor is, and leave the chain in the water for a little bit to get some of the mud off. You can see the chain down there, and we'll come up. See, there's some mud on it, but there is current flowing past, which is rinsing it as it comes up. Normally I would hook up my wash down and rinse it off as it comes up, but since the boat's in the marina, I'm going to do that with fresh water. Once we get back, I'll just take the chain out and rinse it thoroughly with fresh water, which will be better than a saltwater rinse. Now, you're not supposed to use the windlass to pull the boat toward the anchor, but today, with essentially less than a knot of wind, what I'm going to do is just let the weight of the anchor chain gradually pull the boat forward. Okay, there's another chain mark. And we'll just wait until the anchor chain is straight down and go again. We're getting a little mud, but not much. That'll be easy to rinse off when we have lots of water pressure at the marina. And it's kind of a pain to deal with the wash down and get underway at the same time. Chain's coming up relatively clean though. I believe that's the 50-foot mark right on the roller now. Some places the chain comes up really wet, muddy, and you really do need to rinse it, but not so much today. Okay, we're starting to get a little load. And just having a little more mud on the chain. Just leave it in the water for a few seconds. You can hear the change in the pitch of the windlass motor when we start to put some load on. I think the anchor is off the bottom, or close. Let's let the mud come off a little more. So this is usually a couple-minute job. There she is, the anchor. So we're up. Let it spin. Okay, this is always the hardest part. I'm gonna have to pull this up the last little bit by hand. There's where we anchored to the east of Roderick Head, right there. And there's the ledge that we have to avoid. As we head out, the only things we've got are a nun buoy that marks another ledge. We want to leave that to port. And then out at the entrance to Mackerel Cove, which is this entire area here, is a green bell buoy that we want to leave to starboard because it marks a 1 foot point. Other than that, this is a pretty easy in and out. And the only other hazard, of course, is lobster gear. Today we're on an incoming tide, and it's about an hour from here over to the Bass Harbor Bar, maybe a little bit more, depending on how fast we go. So we will probably be crossing the Bass Harbor Bar against the tide yet again. So hopefully the wind will pick up a little and we can actually sail. The only issue though is the currents are pretty strong in Blue Hill Bay. So if you're sailing, if you don't have very much wind, particularly if you're sailing east or west, going across Blue Hill Bay, you're going to get set north on an incoming tide and south on an outgoing tide. And the toggled lobster pots will be stretched across our course. So if you don't have much wind on a boat like this that doesn't have great steerage, you may find yourself having a great deal of difficulty avoiding the lobster gear. So usually when there's light air like this, it's safer and easier just to motor. And that's probably any boats we see this morning. They may have a mainsail up, but they'll be motoring. Anyway, as we leave Mackerel Cove, I'll come back once we get out into Blue Hill Bay proper. There is Mackerel Cove astern. There's a light breeze now, but it's not enough to sail. I mean, I can feel wind on my face, but you can see the ripples on the water end in about 100 yards, and it's just glassy calm. So it's gonna be a while before we sail, if at all, on this return. We've got 12 miles if we do the shortest distance, and so a little over 2 hours. As you can see, there are no other boats that I can see underway. There may be a sailboat putting sail up over there, but you probably can't see it. Well, there might be one boat off to the north. Looks like a small sailboat motoring. And we're probably going to encounter the Bass Harbor Ferry at some point. And that is the Bass Harbor Bar, way over there, about 6 miles away. Well, here's our turning point, and there's lots of lobster gear all toggled out here. So I'll have to watch it. I probably won't film much because I got to be careful. Remember, there will be currents setting me to port out here. And we've got about an hour run to the Bass Harbor Bar. Now, the fact that it's really flat out here this morning is actually very typical of this part of the Maine coast in the summer. It's quite usual for there to be almost no wind in the morning. The wind usually comes in, maybe starting around 11 or noon. As you can see, this is about as flat as it gets. Well, we've crossed most of Blue Hill Bay. That's Bass Harbor right there. And the Bass Harbor Bar ahead, you can see the lighthouse on the point. There's a catamaran that might actually be sailing, even though it's very, very light wind out here. Every other boat we've passed was motoring, like that one over there, which obviously would be since it's a power boat. And the only issue today has been dodging the lobster gear. There's not a huge amount, but in the deeper parts of Blue Hill Bay, it's almost all toggle, which means the line from the trap goes up to a small float called the toggle float, and then there is a line tied onto that line, maybe 6 feet below the toggle float, that goes over to the main float. And here's a toggle pair right here. The white buoy is the toggle float. That's where the line goes down. And there's a horizontal line from the toggle buoy to the colored float. So you do not want to pass between those, especially when you're under power. And one way you can always tell a toggled float from an untoggled float in deeper water, it's 100 feet here, is that the float that has the down line will be standing pretty much straight up, because the weight of the line will keep it vertical, and the float that is tied off to below the toggle buoy will be lying flat on the water. And also, you'll often see a buoy lying flat on the water, but no visible toggle float. What that means is that the toggle float has been pulled under by the weight of the line, by the action of current on the line, or something like that. And so anytime you see a buoy lying flat, you want to stay well away from it, because there probably is, if it's in deeper water over 100 feet, a toggle buoy tied to it that is underwater. We've passed several that were 3 or 4 feet down. Just perfect to get caught up in your prop. And here we are approaching the Bass Harbor Bar, where we are going to have current against us. And another view of Bass Harbor over there. I'll come back when we're on the bar and have a good view of the lighthouse. Right now we're coming up on the Bass Harbor Bar, which is a shallow bar which runs from Mount Desert Island, right there near the lighthouse, across to Gotts Island. And it's shallowest over by Gotts Island. Over here on the Mount Desert Island side, the minimum depth is around 10 to 12 feet on a zero tide. But there is a channel between two buoys, and you can just see the first one, this red-white buoy here. That is WB, which marks the west end of the channel across the Bass Harbor Bar, and I think it has about 14 feet at minimum depth on a zero tide. And you get out of that channel, you'll see, about 4 feet less water, and on a negative tide, correspondingly less. And so what you do if you want to stay in the channel is simply run the line between the two buoys. Right now we're at about 2/3 tide. That means we have about 8 feet of water over minimum depth. So the minimum depth out here right now is probably about 18 feet. So there's no real concern about depth, especially for this boat, which draws 4.5 feet. A sailboat that draws 6 feet or less can cross pretty much on any tide, except for -3 or something, anywhere on the northern half of the bar. In other words, the Mount Desert Island half of the bar. So here we go, WB. It's a gong. long buoy. And of course, a red-white buoy means that it marks a safe channel. And we're starting to get some foul current. We were running about 5.7 knots. We're down to 4.9, and it's going to drop off even more as we get onto the bar proper. We're not quite on the shallow point yet. We're at 46 feet. And right there is the Bass Harbor Head Lighthouse. So when you see that, you know where you are. And the light is a flashing red, and it does run at night. And unfortunately, there is lobster here, even here on the bar. So you got to leave it well off to the side so you don't inadvertently get swept onto it by the current. The current on this bar can run up to 3 knots. So it's not a horrible current, but definitely will slow you down, and depending on exactly which way you're going, can set you to one side or the other. And down to 33 feet. And here's a nice view of the lighthouse. And there are surprisingly few people there, although I can see a few at the lighthouse itself and heading down the stairs to the rocks so they can view the lighthouse. The classic pictures of the Bass Harbor Lighthouse are taken from down on the rocks to the east of the lighthouse. You can see that stairway there. People come down there and scramble out on the rocks to get the sort of classic picture of the lighthouse. So, it's a nice view of the lighthouse from out here on the water. We're only maybe 300 yards from it. As we motor across the Bass Harbor Bar. Which, even though we're getting about a knot of foul tide right now, is much flatter than it was yesterday when we were going the other way. So the current was much worse yesterday. And you can see a few people on the rocks as we head across the bar. We're down to 22 feet now. And I'm going to head out of the channel at this point. One last look at the lighthouse. And I'm going to head out of the channel. I don't know if you can see it over there, but there's another buoy. That is the Long Ledge Buoy, and that is the buoy where we're going to turn north and head into the Western Way and the great harbor of Mount Desert Island. We're back up to 25 feet. And we've lost about a knot of boat speed. So we're about an hour and 40 minutes before high. So the current has started to slacken. We look at the rocky coast of Maine here on Bass Harbor Head. And there is EB, which marks the eastern end of the channel across the Bass Harbor Bar. This is the southern end of Mount Desert Island here. This entire strip from the Bass Harbor Bar Lighthouse all the way over to Seawall at the entrance to the Western Way is in Acadia National Park. And we are just coming up on the entrance to Ship Harbor. And it has been a very, very popular trail this summer. I've seen as many as 70 cars parked there. As we come to the entrance. Yeah, there's the entrance to Ship Harbor. And you can see people on the rocks. Zoom in. And in just a few seconds, you'll be able to look right in Ship Harbor. Sorry, I had to adjust course a little bit. Again. Entrance opening up as we come in directly south of it. Sorry for the movements in the camera. I have to watch for lobster gear. And there's the entrance right there, showing up pretty well. Starting to see into Ship Harbor. And this close to high tide, there'll be water all the way in. At low tide, the entrance actually drains out, and you can, if you're on a negative tide, you can walk right across. We're currently heading east. So that's north of us there. You can see the entrance pretty well now, going into Ship Harbor. And just east of Ship Harbor is a little peninsula, and that is where the Wonderland Trail ends up. Right out to spot where you can get right down to the water very easily. And another very popular trail. And there, just to the right of that peninsula, you can see into the Western Way and the great entrance to the great harbor of Mount Desert Island. And the island right over there is Great Cranberry.
I see it. Look, probably 4 or 5 of them.
Well, we just turned more or less north at the Long Ledge Buoy, and there's a little bit of wind, so we set sail. And supposedly, yeah, astern of us, directly astern, I'll zoom in, you can see some harbor porpoises. This is our 3rd sighting on this trip. They're a ways back there. Probably won't show up even zoomed in. And there are the Duck Islands. Great Cranberry, Baker in the distance, and the hills of Mount Desert Island as we're sailing back toward the great harbor of Mount Desert Island. And over there is the picnic area at Seawall, and right there is the end of the Wonderland Peninsula. So we have about 4.5 miles to go, and we will be back in Southwest Harbor. We're sailing now at 3 knots, so probably an hour and a half or so before we're back. And I'm running low on battery, so I think I'm going to call this video over. Hope you enjoyed seeing this little trip from Southwest Harbor, Maine, south out of the Great Harbor, then west over to Mackerel Cove on the north side of Swans Island, and then a good deal of the return today. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. Goodbye.